The financial decisions that I make in my 40s are completely different than the ones that I made in my 20s and in my 30s. And I have no doubt that the decisions that I make in my 50s will be different than the decisions that I'm making in my 40s. I truly believe that for every decade, there's an opportunity for us to grow. And that could be from a spiritual perspective, or it could be from a financial perspective. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over 9 things that I no longer spend a ton of money on now that I'm in my 40s. And the very first thing is credit card interest. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, then you know that I've talked a lot about being in credit card debt in my 20s and how difficult that process was for me to actually get out of that. And once I paid off those credit cards and got out of debt, I never put myself back into that situation ever again. However, I didn't always pay my credit cards off in full, and I did have times where I had to pay interest. Now that I'm in my 40s, I've taken a much more proactive approach to making sure that I don't pay any interest on any of my credit cards, right? So I have 2 credit cards that I use, one that I use for travel, and then one that I use for when I'm purchasing items to reinvest back into my channel, right? So any of the equipment that I'm using, whether that's microphones, lighting, or cameras, I have a specific credit card that I use for that. And then I have another credit card that I use that's primarily used to pay for everything that I use on a monthly basis, whether that's grocery store, utilities, etc. It goes on another card. Now, even though I'm in my 40s, it's been about a decade since I've had to pay any interest on a credit card because I simply use them for what I need to, and then I pay them in full every single month. I'm not fooling around with paying money to the bank to borrow money. Now, I think having a credit card is an extremely powerful tool that you can use to your advantage if you know how to use it and if you're disciplined enough to pay it off every single month. Now, the second thing I'm not spending a lot of money on now that I'm in my 40s is spending a lot of money on designer clothes and designer shoes. Now, I will say that I still like to buy nice shoes, right? I really like buying Air Maxes. Those are usually my go-to shoes. But I'm not worried about having 15 to 20 pairs of shoes in my closet like I did whenever I was in my 20s. And now that I look back at all of the money that I wasted on clothes and shoes that I really didn't need, it really puts things in perspective, right? Because we spend so much money on things that we think that we need. And then later on, after you've had an opportunity to mature and have a little bit of growth, you realize that those things were completely meaningless. Now, that money could have been spent on a number of different things. It could have been used to invest. It could have been used to pay off my mortgage earlier. Tons of different things that I could have used that money on. But now that I'm in my 40s, I'm not focused on that at all. Not even a little bit. Now, the third thing that I'm no longer spending money on now that I'm in my 40s is not necessarily have to do with spending money, but is I'm no longer taking advice from broke people. Now, I'm not saying that to bash people that may be having a tough time financially, but if you really think about it, the people that usually have the least usually have the most opinions and are the loudest on how you're supposed to move from a financial perspective or from a career perspective. And whenever I was in my 20s, I listened to this to my detriment because I think that a lot of the advice that I was getting from these people really prevented me from being able to grow as quickly as I could. Now, again, I'm not saying this to make people feel bad or to look down on people, but you just have to be really mindful of who you're taking advice from when it comes to what you want to do from a financial or career perspective, right? If you're looking to grow, you want to seek out people that can potentially be a mentor, people that have done what you want to do. Now, the fourth thing that I'm no longer spending a lot of money on now that I'm in my 40s is spending a bunch of money on unnecessary vacations and travel. Now, this was an issue of mine up until my mid-30s. I really like to travel. We're talking Vegas, we're talking New Orleans, we're talking Miami, you name it. I am someone who really enjoys traveling and trying out new places, meeting new people, trying new foods, and all that good stuff. But now that I'm in my 40s, I've really tapered back on that because although I do like to travel, I do like to have a good time, I think it can be done in moderation. So instead of doing 3 to 4 trips every single year, I may try to do 1 or 2 trips depending on what's going on. And one of the things that I started to do really in my 40s is I have one credit card that I use that is travel related. And the card that I use allows me to average between $800 to $1,000 every single year, and rewards that I then flip and use to travel. I don't have to go out and spend a ton of money to enjoy myself. I can spend a moderate amount of money, still have a good time and travel, but also be mindful that whatever I have budgeted for that travel is all that I'm spending. Now, the fifth thing that I'm no longer spending a ton of money on is buying new cars. Now, this could have been number one for me. I have always been somebody that has loved to buy cars. I typically buy cars that are used but new to me, and they're roughly 2 to 3 years old, so I let the original owner take on the hit of the depreciation. Now, the problem with this is whenever you're getting in and out of a car, every 18 to 24 months, it becomes pretty expensive. You never have a car that's fully paid off, and you're always spending money on a car payment when that money could be spent on other things. Now, the car that I have right now is a 2018. It's paid off. I've owned it for 4 years. This is the longest that I've ever owned a car. And I'm not saying that I won't go out and get a newer car at some point, but it's not something that I'm focused on, right? Because in my 30s, and especially in my late 20s, I would have already had 2 or 3 different cars over the same time frame, and I'd still be paying car payments. So the fact that my car is paid off right now, it's still in good condition, it still works well, I'm not focused on that. The money that I would have normally been spending on a car payment, I'm now just putting it in the stock market, and I'm investing every single month. Now, the sixth thing that I'm no longer spending a ton of money on now that I'm in my 40s is always upgrading to the latest and greatest technology. I remember I was one of the people that had to get a new iPhone upgrade every single year. So from 2009 all the way up until about 2020, I was upgrading my iPhone every single year. Now, sure, I was able to trade it in and get some trade-in credits, but I was spending $500 to $700 every single year to upgrade a device that really didn't have very many changes to it, right? So if you are an Apple person and you buy Apple phones or watches, you know that their upgrades or updates that they give you in their devices are usually pretty minimal, right? You might get a new camera, phone might have a new chip that allows it to process a little bit quicker. But overall, you're not getting much for the money that you have to spend every time you want to be in that upgrade cycle. We had iPhone 11s up until this past year, and the only reason that we upgraded is because our phones were really starting to act up and not work the way that they were supposed to. So we had our old phones for about 4 or 5 years, whereas in the past, I would have been upgrading my phone every single year. Now that I have an iPhone 16, I can tell you I'm not going to be upgrading or updating this phone for years. I'm going to use this phone until the wheels fall off. That's just what it is. It's not worth it to me anymore. The seventh thing that I'm no longer spending a lot of money on now that I'm in my 40s is going to bars and clubs. Now, I didn't really spend a lot of time in bars and clubs in my 30s, but whenever I was in my 20s, I was at a bar or a club every single weekend, and I blew so much money that it's ridiculous. I mean, if you really think about it, you go to the club, if you buy a bottle, they're going to charge you $300 or $400 for that bottle. And you can go to the liquor store and that same bottle is going to be $75 or $80. So you can only imagine how much money people are throwing away by going to bars and clubs. Now, in my 30s, I did go to bars and clubs, but just not very often. And now that I'm in my 40s, I just don't go. It's just not the place for me. It's not my scene. Now, the eighth thing that I'm no longer spending a ton of money on now that I'm in my 40s is fine dining. Now, I will say that I do like to go to places like Steak 48 every now and then to have a steak. They're one of my favorite steakhouses, and I really enjoy going. But I'm not going to places like that more than once or twice a year. I put fine dining in the same category as traveling. I think it's fine if you do it in moderation, but if you're doing it every single month, then that could become problematic. Now, can I afford it? Sure. But just because I can afford it doesn't mean that I'm gonna go out and do it multiple times every single month. Like I said, I've just had a complete shift in my mindset, and the things that were important to me in my 30s are just not as important to me as they are in my 40s. And the ninth thing that I'm no longer worried about spending money on now that in my 40s is keeping up with the Joneses. We as a people love to compare our situations with other people. And I believe that comparison is the thief of joy. So one of the things that I really focused on that I no longer am doing is worrying about what the next person is doing with their life, right? So if they want to go out and buy a new car, that's fine. If they want to take a fancy vacation, that's fine. And if they want to spend money to buy a vacation home, then that's on them. I'm focused on my long-term goals and my long-term plans. And I'm not going to be concerned about what anybody else is doing. Keeping up with the Joneses was an issue for me in my 20s, rolling into my early 30s. But now that I'm in my 40s, it's absolutely a thing in the past. Leave a comment down below. Let me know. What do you guys think? What are some of the things that you are no longer spending money on now that you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, or even your 50s? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.